Okay, so Intel has been kind of like putting the on the motherboard manufacturers saying, hey, all you guys, get your shit together. Problem is they're not really getting their shit together.
Cablemod's new StealthSense technology effectively eliminates the need for sense wires for your 40 series GPU. StealthSense features a hidden bridge which signals the GPU that a full 600 watts is available, all without the need for fragile sense wires that can easily be dislodged, leading to a black screen and 100% fans. To see the full spec list and power supplies supported, follow the link in the description below.
Okay, so this story's been kind of like ongoing now for a while. Just a little backstory if you haven't watched it already. I've personally been complaining about 13th and 14th gen since they launched, but the complaints about motherboard manufacturers pushing limits and making CPUs perform higher than the real out-of-the-box like Intel specs would be has been going on since like 8th gen. Like 8th gen, 8000 series, like 8700K CPU was the first time we saw in reviews that there was really massive varying scores between reviewers, because a lot of us weren't catching the fact that board manufacturers like ASUS were pushing limits and pushing values and multi-core enhancement out of the box, giving a very different out of the box experience. And up until now, it's kind of been a complaint, but it hasn't been a problem until now, where CPUs are now starting to actually be physically damaged by the liberties that motherboard manufacturers are taking. Now, I'm using an ASUS Z690 Maximus formula on a 13900K. Now the issue between like the i9 CPUs for 13th and 14th gen, which are essentially just the same CPU, they're the exact same die process, so that's why they're really kind of lumped together in these particular discussions when it comes to the i9 stuff. There's confusion even amongst like Intel's explanations of the different profiles and stuff, because there are multiple profiles. So there's an Intel baseline. We'll talk about that in a second, because that's sort of a ghost number, if you will. Then there's Intel Performance, and then there's Intel Extreme. Now that's just the Intel side. Then you take the motherboard manufacturers kind of putting their own secret sauce into it. Then you never know what the f you're getting when you put in a CPU into a motherboard and turn it on. And now that we've had plenty of CPUs fail, either no longer stable at stock speeds or dying altogether, Intel finally had to like rein in the motherboard manufacturers and say, hey, you need to start enforcing our limits, which are on this table right here. We'll talk about these limits in a second. The problem is, like ASUS on their Prime board, and I don't know if it's going to exist on the Formula board, we're going to figure this out together, went like so far the other direction. It's almost like they did it as spite. It's almost like ASUS was like, fine, you make tell us what to do, then we're going to go ahead and gimp your performance. Well, okay, let's talk about that. First and foremost, one of the biggest complaints I've talked about a million times, and I'll go ahead and do it right now, is that when you load optimize defaults, and then we go ahead and restart, you'll notice optimize defaults is nothing more than enabling multi-core enhancement. Now those multi-core enhancements have numbers built into them that, depending on your BIOS version, by the way, and based on the motherboard manufacturer, they all kind of like live in the auto overclocking realm of whatever the hell they decide they want it to be. So it's going to be different between board manufacturer and board manufacturer, and different between board and board, because this is an overclocking board. So of course it's going to try and push those limits even higher. But the point is, as a consumer, remember, this is a recap of the problem. So if you've already seen the video and you're like, why are you repeating yourself? It's for those that haven't. Is auto let BIOS optimize is multi-core enhancement on. So auto let BIOS optimize is on. Then we have disabled enforce all limits. So really what you're disabling is the multi-core enhancement, right? So by turning that off, you should be enforcing all limits. That's where we get the 400 amps and the 253 long duration, 253 short duration. But if I was to do enabled auto let BIOS optimize for multi-core enhancement, it sets that to 511 amps. It sets the short duration to 4096, which is then just unlimited. So what we're gonna do today, I've now downloaded their latest BIOS. The latest BIOS dated April 24th, 2024. So 42424. It's a palindrome. So this is actually a new message. This is the first time I've seen this. It just got done flashing our BIOS, so I'm gonna remove the drive. It says press F1 to continue and take advantage of ASUS optimized performance. If you wish to follow Intel guidelines and apply its stock power limits, please disable the ASUS multi-core enhancement MCE in the BIOS settings. Next, you'll enter the, you know, I feel like if that message was always there on first boot, I kind of would have been okay. But that was never there until now. This is from 8th gen until now. So no matter what, it's gonna apply it. You have to go into the BIOS. So there should be an F2 to just load Intel default. Why aren't they doing that? It's literally F1 to go to setup, but when you go to setup, it's also gonna automatically turn on optimized performance. So it should give you an option on the boot right now to F1 for optimized performance or F2 for Intel baselines. We'll talk about that now, because that's the next part of this. So F1. Okay, optimized defaults are on. We're now on 3501, 41924 build date, and there we go. So there's a bunch of stuff we need to check right now. So auto let optimize is now enabled, 511.75 amps, so it's as high as you could possibly go before 512. There's our 4,095 watts. It is 56 seconds, and 4,095 watts. Okay, so what kind of profiles do we get now if we look under... Okay, so all we get is auto let BIOS optimize, disable enforce all limits, enabled remove all limits. So they're exactly the same settings. There's nothing there listed as Intel defaults, which is kind of crazy. Okay, so disabled enforce all limits. There we go, let's do that. Okay, 280 amp, which is below the 307 performance already. So that's kind of weird. Long package duration 253, short package 253.56. Those numbers are good. That's what we'd expect right here, because that's what we have. We're gonna be looking for CEP current excursion protection needs to be enabled. Oh, they're disabled. I thought you were following Intel's chart, ASUS. Can't wait for the 17-page email about how I'm dumb on this one. Okay, CEP excursion protection enable. Well, they're off for whatever reason. So let's enable those. Okay, so unlimited ICC max should be set to disable. Well, again, I don't know what it's doing because it's not telling me what it's doing. So we'll disable that one. Okay, wait. So I just went through all that and I noticed there's Intel baseline profile up here. I guess that makes sense because it's not a part of multi-core enhancement. Okay, you know what? Fine, let's just undo everything I just did. Let's enable that. So ASUS multi-core enhancement auto let BIOS optimize is going to disabled enforce all limits, SVID behavior auto, Intel's failsafe. Okay, IA CEP and SA CEP to enabled, IA TDC current limit auto to Intel's default. If you remember that message, if we go and pop it back up on the screen, it says, if you want to use Intel's baseline settings to go into BIOS and disable multi-core enhancement, which is that disabled enable all limits. But as you saw, there's that whole separate section that you have to actually select and hit enter and reboot to truly get the baselines. And then on top of it, it's still not even accurate based on Intel's chart because it should be 400 amps, but it's 280. So this is why Intel is also saying don't use baseline, but if you don't use baseline, then you have to use their multi-core enhancement, which means as a PC user now, you have to go in and manually turn on this shit. This is why it's so infuriating. Okay, 67C, so it probably maxed out at 75 once the coolant's fully hot. Our clocks though, immediately are at 4.7 gigahertz all-core. It's only pulling 208 watts right now under load. I guarantee it's because of the amps that are set too low. 33,701. That is not what you paid for. Do you know why? Because again, ASUS is incapable of following a simple chart. So I'm gonna set this to 400 right now. I'm gonna make sure that 400 applied and we're gonna run it again. Okay, so this is now the Intel Extreme profile, 253, and 400 amps. So we still don't have as much clock speed as we really would like to see, but we are getting the Intel numbers, and 5 gigs makes sense. It's probably gonna be like a 35,000 score. That was 36,220. So do you see how one setting that ASUS was too stupid to actually be able to put into a profile cost you 3,000 points in Cinebench? The biggest problem here is absolutely no end user should ever have to go in and manually enter a value into their motherboard BIOS settings to get the CPU's default parameters to run. If you recall, in the BIOS, we had to go to two spots to get the wrong thing to apply. We had to disable the multi-core bullshit, and then we had to click on Intel baseline, say yes, reboot it, and then go in and manipulate the amps to even get to the score where we are right now, which is actually, believe it or not, still scoring a little bit low. It should be more like 37,000, 38,000. That's where it should be. Even Gigabyte, a brand that I have complained about in the past, hardcore about having some of the worst BIOS on the planet, even has a drop down where you can select different Intel profiles. Why is ASUS not able to do that? They band-aided these BIOS together to add that button to appease Intel, because Intel finally had to get involved and say, WTF, bro, and then they still f***ed it up. Anyway, if I see mad at ASUS, they deserve it. ASUS has drank their own Kool-Aid for so long, they don't think they ever can possibly do anything wrong. But I'm here to tell you right now, ASUS has no problems killing your CPU. They don't. They don't have any problem with it at all. Do you know why? Because Intel let them get away with it long enough now. So now that Intel is trying to, bring a stray dog back in the house, it's no longer housebroken. So it's gonna take some time. And now I'm dealing with this on Skunkworks too, because the Maximus board on that one is all borked with settings too. So it's spoon-fed.